Good evening all, and welcome back to Hidden Fears. Tonight we descend into the heart of Appalachia, where ancient mountains hold secrets that refuse to stay buried. 10 encounters with children who should not exist, standing at doorways they were never invited through, appearing on roads that lead nowhere, asking questions that demand answers no sane person should give. These are not stories of imagination or folklore passed down through generations. These are documented encounters, witnessed accounts, moments when ordinary people faced something that defied every natural law they had ever known. Children with eyes as black as midnight, children who never age, never sleep, never leave those who see them unchanged. From isolated cabins to crowded churches, from lonely highways to trusted institutions, these entities have appeared across decades, leaving behind only questions and the shattered certainty of those who survived. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Hidden Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the Appalachian deep woods, where civilization ends and terror begins. So I have a winter isolation story for you that is going to make you think twice about ever answering your door after dark. This comes from McKenna, and what happened to her in a rental cabin deep in the West Virginia mountains changed everything about how she views reality itself. No worries if you think you understand what is possible and what is not in this world, because what McKenna experienced will shatter every certainty you have ever held about the nature of existence. It was January of 2019, and McKenna had made what seemed like a perfectly reasonable decision at the time. She was a freelance writer working on her second novel, and the distractions of city life were killing her productivity. Social media, friends dropping by, delivery drivers knocking, the constant hum of traffic outside her apartment window. She needed isolation, complete and total silence, the kind you can only find in places where civilization has surrendered to wilderness. So she found a rental listing online for a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, about 40 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a winding dirt road that climbed 3,000 feet into terrain that looked like it had not changed since the last ice age. The cabin was perfect for her needs. 2 rooms, a wood-burning stove, solar panels for minimal electricity, and absolutely no internet connection. The owner had been upfront about that last part. Cell service was non-existent up there. If she needed to contact anyone, there was a satellite phone with limited minutes, but that was it. McKenna had smiled when she read that detail. Perfect. No distractions meant no excuses. She packed her laptop, printed research materials, enough food for 2 weeks, and drove up that mountain road on a clear Tuesday afternoon, watching the bare winter trees close in around her like skeletal fingers reaching for a gray sky. The first 3 days were exactly what she had hoped for. She wrote from sunrise until her eyes burned, took walks through the snow-covered forest, cooked simple meals on the wood stove, and fell asleep each night to the absolute silence that only true wilderness provides. That silence was so complete it almost had weight to it, pressing against her eardrums, making her aware of her own heartbeat, and breathing in ways she had never experienced before. By Thursday evening, she had written 40 pages, more than she had managed in the previous month at home. Thursday night, the snow began. Not the gentle, picturesque kind that drifts down like in movies, but the aggressive Appalachian blizzard that turns the world into a white void and makes you understand why people used to die just trying to walk between their house and barn. McKenna watched it through the cabin windows, watched the wind drive the snow horizontal, watched the drifts climb higher against the walls. She checked the weather radio, the one modern convenience the cabin owner had insisted she bring. The storm was expected to last through Saturday. The access road would be impassable for days after that, until the county could get plows up there. McKenna did the math. She had enough food, enough firewood, enough propane for the backup heater. She was fine, isolated but fine. She made dinner, added logs to the wood stove, and settled in with her laptop as the storm raged outside. The solar panels were useless in this weather, but she had charged her laptop fully and could get another few hours of work done before the battery died. She was deep into a chapter, fingers moving across the keyboard, when she heard it. 3 knocks, deliberate, evenly spaced, clear, despite the howling wind outside. Knock, knock, knock on the front door. McKenna stopped typing. Her hands hovered over the keyboard as her mind tried to process what she had just heard. There was no one out there. There could not be anyone out there. She was 40 miles from town in a blizzard that had already dropped 2 feet of snow with visibility near zero, but she had definitely heard knocking. She stood slowly, walked to the window beside the door, and looked out into the white chaos. For a moment, she saw nothing but snow and darkness. Then the motion sensor light above the door triggered, and she saw them. 2 children stood on the porch, a boy and a girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old. They wore thin cotton clothes, summer clothes, a t-shirt and shorts on the boy, a sundress on the girl, no coats, no hats, no gloves. Their hair was plastered to their heads with melting snow, and they stood perfectly still, staring at the door, not shivering, not hugging themselves for warmth, just standing there as if waiting for a bus on a pleasant afternoon. McKenna felt her breath catch in her throat. Her first thought was that they were lost, that they had wandered away from some cabin she did not know about and were in immediate danger of freezing to death. She reached for the door handle, then stopped. Something was wrong. Children lost in a blizzard would be crying, panicking, banging on the door desperately. These children just stood there, calm and patient, and they were looking at the door, not at the window where she stood. It was as if they knew she was watching, but would not acknowledge her until she opened the door. She moved away from the window to the door itself and called out, "Are you okay? Are you lost?" Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, thin and uncertain. There was a pause, and then a voice answered. A child's voice, sweet and clear, completely unbothered by the cold or the storm. "We are cold. May we come inside?" The phrasing struck her immediately. Not, "Please let us in," or "Help us," but "May we come inside?" Formal and old-fashioned, the kind of language children do not use anymore. McKenna's hand was on the deadbolt, but she did not turn it. Some instinct screamed at her to stop, to think, to not open that door. She looked back at the window, and the boy had turned his head. He was looking directly at her now, and even from 15 feet away through a window streaked with snow, she could see his eyes. They were completely black. Not dark brown, not dilated pupils, but solid black from edge to edge, like someone had filled the sockets with ink. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug behind her. "Please," the girl's voice came through the door. "We need to come in. It is so cold out here. You would not want us to freeze, would you?" The words were right, but the tone was wrong. There was no desperation in it, no fear. It was the tone of someone asking a reasonable question, expecting a reasonable answer. McKenna found her voice. "Where are your parents? How did you get here?" There was another pause, longer this time. When the girl spoke again, the sweetness had faded slightly. "Our parents are not here. We have been walking for a long time. We just need to come inside and get warm. You just need to invite us in. Please invite us in." That phrasing again. Invite us in. Not let us in, but invite us in, as if permission was some kind of requirement, some kind of rule they had to follow. McKenna backed further away from the door. The wind howled, and the cabin creaked around her. She looked at the wood stove, at her laptop on the table, at the satellite phone mounted on the wall. Normal things, real things. She looked back at the door, and 3 more knocks came. Knock, knock, knock. Exactly the same rhythm, exactly the same force. "We know you are in there. The boy's voice said, "We can hear you breathing. We can hear your heartbeat. Why will you not let us in? We only want to get warm." She should call someone. The satellite phone had an emergency function, but who would she call? What would she say? "There are children on my porch in a blizzard, and I will not let them in because their eyes are black." They would tell her to open the door immediately to save those children from freezing. They would think she was insane or cruel, but everything in her body was screaming that opening that door would be the worst mistake of her life. "I'm going to call for help," she said loudly. "I'm going to get someone to come help you find your parents." She moved toward the satellite phone. The knocking came again, but this time it was not 3 measured taps. It was a rapid hammering that went on for 10 seconds, 20, 30. Boom, 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 like a drum roll, like something trying to break through. Then it stopped abruptly. Silence. McKenna stood frozen, hand outstretched toward the phone. The silence stretched out. Then the lights went out. The solar battery should have had hours left. The backup propane heater had its own power source, but everything electrical in the cabin died simultaneously, plunging her into darkness broken only by the faint orange glow from the wood stove. McKenna grabbed her phone from her pocket, turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the door. Nothing. She moved to the window. Empty porch. The motion light should have been on, but it was dead too. She swept the flashlight beam across the porch, the yard, the tree line. No children. They had vanished. She stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes, listening to the storm, listening for any sound of movement outside. Nothing. Eventually, she forced herself to move. She checked the electrical panel. Everything looked fine, but nothing worked. She added more wood to the stove, grateful that at least that required no electricity. She pulled blankets around herself and sat on the couch facing the door, phone flashlight in one hand, fireplace poker in the other, feeling ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. At 12:30 a.m., the tapping started. Not on the door this time. On the window to her left. Tap, tap, tap. She turned her light toward it, but saw nothing through the glass except darkness and snow. Tap, tap, tap. On the window, to her right now. She spun, light sweeping across the room. Nothing. Tap, 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 tap. On every window simultaneously. A rhythm, like rain, but too regular, too purposeful. It went on for minutes that felt like hours. Then it stopped. In the silence that followed, she heard the voice. The girl's voice, but it came from everywhere and nowhere, inside the cabin somehow. "You are being very rude. We only wanted to come in and get warm. Now we are sad. Now we are angry. Now we will wait." McKenna screamed. She could not help it, and the sound of her own voice broke something inside her. She ran to the bathroom, the only room with no windows, and locked herself inside. She sat in the bathtub, fully clothed, wrapped in blankets, shaking uncontrollably. The tapping continued throughout the night, sometimes soft, sometimes violent enough to rattle the windows in their frames. Sometimes she heard footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. Sometimes she heard children laughing, high and musical and completely wrong. She did not leave the bathroom. She did not sleep. She sat in that bathtub with her phone, flashlight pointed at the door, and prayed for sunrise. When gray light finally started to filter under the bathroom door, the sound stopped. McKenna waited another hour before she dared to move. She emerged from the bathroom into a cabin that looked exactly as she had left it. The electrical power was back on. Everything worked. She went to the windows and looked outside. The storm had ended. Fresh snow covered everything in pristine white. And there, in that fresh snow, were footprints. They circled the cabin. Hundreds of footprints, thousands maybe, layered over each other in concentric circles, all going in the same direction, all the same size. Child-sized. But the depth of them was wrong. They sank into the snow at least 8 inches, far too deep for a child's weight. McKenna stood at the window, staring at those footprints, and she understood that whatever had been outside her cabin last night, they were not children. Not really. Not anymore. Maybe they had been once, but now they were something else. Something that wore the shape of children like a mask. She packed in 10 minutes. She left half her belongings behind. She did not care. She had to get out. The access road was still impassable with snow, but she did not care about that either. She would walk the 40 miles to town if she had to. She would freeze to death trying, rather than spend another night in that place. As she was loading her car, she found something on the porch that made her blood turn to ice. 2 sets of small, wet footprints leading up to the door, but no footprints leading away, as if the children had simply appeared on the porch from nowhere, or as if they had never left at all and were still standing there, invisible, waiting. She drove down that mountain road at speeds that were absolutely insane for the conditions. Twice she nearly went over the edge. She did not slow down. When she finally reached the county highway and saw other cars, other people, normal reality, she pulled over and cried for 20 minutes. She drove straight past her exit, drove 5 hours to her parents' house in Ohio, and stayed there for a month before she could even think about going back to her own apartment. McKenna did eventually contact the cabin owner to explain why she had left early. He listened to her story in silence, and when she finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. "You are the third person," he said finally. "Third person to rent that cabin and report the same thing. Children at the door at midnight during a snowstorm. Children with black eyes. I should have warned you. I'm sorry. I tell myself it is not real, that it is just the isolation playing tricks, but 3 people have told me the same exact story. 3 people have run from that cabin in the middle of winter. I keep renting it because I need the income, and because I do not know what else to do. What do I do? Put in the listing that the place is haunted. Who would believe me?" McKenna never went back to that cabin. Never went back to West Virginia at all. She never finished that novel. Every time she tried to work on it, she would remember that night, remember the sound of tapping on every window, remember those footprints that sank too deep and circled endlessly around the place where she had been trapped. She still writes, but only during the day now, only in places with lots of people around. And she never ever answers her door after dark without checking first to see who is there, without making absolutely certain that whoever is asking to come in has eyes that are the right color, the human color, not the solid black of something that only pretends to be a child when it wants to be invited into your home. So I wanted to share with you today a story that is going to make you think very carefully about the kind of people or things that you pick up on dark highways. This comes from a man named Davian, and what happened to him on a lonely stretch of Appalachian Road in Tennessee turned into something that law enforcement still cannot explain to this day. No worries if you think you understand the difference between helping someone in need and making a fatal mistake, because Davian learned that sometimes the line between those two things is thinner than you could ever imagine. It was March of 2021, and Davian was working his regular route as an independent truck driver, hauling freight from Atlanta up through Tennessee and into Kentucky. He had been driving trucks for 15 years at that point, knew every mile of Route 25 through the Appalachian Mountains like he knew his own driveway. It was good, honest work, and he took pride in his safety record, his on-time deliveries, his reputation as someone reliable in an industry where reliability meant everything. He had driven through every kind of weather, every time of day and night, and nothing about this particular Thursday night seemed any different from the 1,000 other nights he had driven this exact same road. It was 2 p.m. when he saw them, 2 figures standing on the shoulder of the highway, right where the road curved around the base of a mountain and the trees pressed in close on both sides. At first, in his headlights, they were just shapes, and his mind cataloged them automatically as deer, or maybe someone whose car had broken down. But as he got closer, the shapes resolved into something specific. 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, standing perfectly still on the gravel shoulder, waving their arms slowly back and forth over their heads, the universal signal for help, Davian's foot moved toward the brake pedal automatically. Then his training kicked in, the rules of the company he contracted with, the insurance requirements, the liability issues. He was not supposed to pick up hitchhikers. He was not supposed to stop for anyone except in cases of clear emergency. But these were children. Children on a highway at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, at least 20 miles from the nearest town in either direction. What kind of person drives past children who need help? He pulled the truck onto the shoulder and climbed down from the cab. The night air was cold, probably in the low 40s, and he could see his breath in the red glow of his taillights. The children had not moved from where they stood. They just watched him approach, hands now at their sides, completely still. "Hey there," Davian called out as he got closer. "Are you kids okay? Where are your parents?" The girl spoke. Her voice was clear and calm, with no trace of fear or distress. "Our parents are at the house. We need a ride. It is not far, just up the road." Davian looked around. There was nothing but forest on both sides of the highway. No driveways, no mailboxes, no indication that anyone lived within miles of this spot. "How did you get out here?" he asked. The boy answered this time, the same calm tone. "We were walking. We got tired. We need a ride now, just up the road." Something about this felt wrong to Davian, but he could not put his finger on exactly what. The children were too calm, maybe. They should have been scared or cold or grateful that someone had stopped. But they just stood there, looking at him, waiting. "Let me call someone," Davian said, pulling out his phone. "I will get the police to come help you." The girl shook her head. "No police, just a ride. You can give us a ride, please." Davian hesitated. His phone showed no signal anyway, which was normal for this stretch of road. The nearest police station was probably 25 miles away. If he drove there to report this, it would take an hour for anyone to get back out here, and who knew what could happen to these kids in that time? Animals. Other drivers who might have worse intentions than he did. The temperature was dropping, and they said their house was just up the road. If that was true, he could have them home in 15 minutes and be back on schedule. "Okay," he heard himself say, "but we are going straight to your house, and I am talking to your parents. This is not right, kids out this late." The children nodded in unison, an identical slight tilt of their heads, and walked toward the truck. Davian opened the passenger door and helped them climb up into the cab. They settled into the seat together, sitting unnaturally still, hands folded in their laps. Davian climbed back into the driver's seat, checked his mirrors, and pulled back onto the highway. "So, where exactly is this house?" he asked as he brought the truck up to speed. "Up ahead," the girl said. "You will see it." Davian waited for more specific information, but none came. He glanced over at the children. In the green glow of the dashboard lights, they looked perfectly normal. Regular kids in regular clothes, jeans, and hooded sweatshirts. But they were not talking to each other, not fidgeting, not doing any of the things children do. They just sat there, staring straight ahead through the windshield. 5 minutes passed. 10. The road climbed and curved through the mountains, and no house appeared. "How much further?" Davian asked. "Just ahead," the boy said. Exactly what the girl had said, word for word, same inflection. 15 minutes, 20. Davian's hands were getting tense on the wheel. "Kids, I need a real answer here. Where's your house?" "Just ahead," they said together, perfectly synchronized, and Davian felt his stomach drop. He glanced at them again, and this time, he happened to look at the right moment, when the dashboard lights caught their faces at just the right angle. For a fraction of a second, he saw their eyes, completely black. Solid black, from edge to edge with no white, no iris, no pupil differentiation, just black. He jerked his eyes back to the road, heart suddenly hammering. No, that was a trick of the light. That was not real. He looked in the rearview mirror, trying to see their reflection. The angle was wrong. He could not see their faces. "I need you kids to tell me right now where your house is, or I'm turning around and taking you to the police station." His voice came out harder than he intended. The children turned their heads in unison to look at him. "You invited us in," the girl said. "You cannot take us back now. You have to take us where we want to go." Davian felt sweat break out on his forehead despite the cold. "Where do you want to go?" "We will tell you when we get there," the boy said. Davian looked at his GPS unit mounted on the dashboard. The screen showed static. He tapped it. Nothing. The screen was dead. His radio, which had been playing country music at low volume, suddenly cut out and filled with white noise. He reached over and turned it off, but the static continued, coming from the speakers, even though the unit was powered down. "What is happening?" Davian said, not really asking the children, just voicing the panic that was building in his chest. The girl leaned closer to him. "We are going home," she said. "You are taking us home. You agreed to take us. You let us in." Her breath on his arm was cold, unnaturally cold, like standing near an open freezer. Davian pulled his arm away and gripped the steering wheel with both hands. He looked at the road ahead. The mile markers should be telling him where he was, how far to the next town. But the mile markers were going in the wrong direction. He had just passed marker 47, and now he passed marker 46, then marker 45. He was going north. He knew he was going north, but the markers said he was going south. No, wait. Now marker 46 again. He had just passed 45. He was going in circles somehow, on a straight road. That was not possible. "Let me out," Davian said. "I am stopping this truck right now, and you kids are getting out." The boy laughed. It was the first emotion either of them had shown, and it was worse than their calm. It was not a child's laugh. It had layers to it, harmonics, like multiple voices laughing at slightly different pitches. "You invited us in," the boy said. "We cannot leave until we are done." Davian's training deserted him. His 15 years of professional driving, his perfect safety record, everything went out the window in a wave of pure animal terror. He yanked the wheel hard right and slammed on the brakes. The truck shuddered and skidded on the shoulder, and before it had fully stopped, Davian threw open his door and jumped. He hit the gravel at 20 miles per hour and rolled, feeling his shoulder crunch, feeling gravel tear through his jacket and shirt and skin. He rolled to a stop and looked up just in time to see his truck pull back onto the highway and accelerate away into the darkness, driverless, with the two children visible through the rear window, still sitting perfectly still, watching him recede into the distance. Davian lay on the shoulder of the highway for probably 10 minutes, maybe longer, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. Pain radiated from his shoulder and down his entire right side. His mind kept trying to supply rational explanations. He had fallen asleep. This was a hallucination from fatigue. He had hit his head and was unconscious somewhere, and this was all a dream. But the pain was too real, the cold was too real, and when he finally forced himself to sit up and then stand, the empty highway stretching away in both directions was definitely, horribly real. His phone was gone, lost somewhere in his roll across the gravel. His truck was gone. The children were gone. He was alone on a dark highway with an injured shoulder and no idea what to do next. He started walking north, or what he thought was north, and after what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes, he saw headlights approaching. A state trooper. Davian flagged him down and poured out his story in a confused rush. The trooper listened with increasing concern, put Davian in the back of the cruiser, and radioed for an ambulance and backup. They found Davian's truck 3 days later in Virginia, almost 200 miles away, parked at a rest stop off Interstate 81. The cab was empty. The cargo in the trailer was undisturbed, but the interior of the cab looked like someone had lived in it for weeks. Fast food wrappers everywhere, empty water bottles, and covering every surface, drawn in something dark and organic that forensics later identified as blood mixed with ash, were symbols. Hundreds of symbols, geometric patterns, shapes that looked almost like writing but in no alphabet anyone could identify. And there was a body. A man, approximately 40 years old, identity never established, lying in the sleeper berth behind the driver's seat. Cause of death was listed as unexplained cardiac arrest, but the autopsy noted several disturbing details. His eyes were missing. Not removed surgically, but gone, with the sockets smooth as if he had never had eyes at all. And when they ran his fingerprints, they came back as belonging to a man who had died in Ohio in 2018. The FBI got involved because the truck had crossed state lines and because there were 2 open missing persons reports filed the same night Davian encountered the children. Both reports were from different counties in Tennessee, over 100 miles apart. Both described the same thing: people calling 911 to report giving a ride to 2 children who vanished from their vehicles while they were driving. One was a woman in her 60s. The other was a college student. Both were found wandering on foot hours later, disoriented, unable to explain where their cars were or what had happened. Davian's truck was returned to him eventually after the investigation concluded with no arrests and no explanation. He sold it immediately at a loss. He could not even look at it. The insurance company fought him on the lost wages and the therapy bills, claiming his story was too inconsistent, too impossible to be covered under his policy. He lost his commercial driver's license because the drug test they administered after the incident came back positive for substances he had never taken in his life. Substances, his defense lawyer argued, must have been introduced through his skin contact with the children. He works in a warehouse now, day shift only, nowhere near highways, nowhere near the routes that cut through Appalachian Mountains in the dark hours of the night. He has a permanent burn scar on his right forearm in the exact shape of a small handprint. It appeared 3 days after the encounter and has never faded. Medical examination showed tissue damage consistent with severe frostbite, even though the night in question never dropped below 40 degrees. On certain nights, particularly when the moon is full, the scar aches and burns, and Davian swears he can feel small cold fingers wrapped around his arm, still holding on, still there, waiting for him to take them the rest of the way home. So I have a wilderness story for you that is going to change how you think about solo camping in remote areas. This comes from a woman named Olivia, and what happened to her deep in the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina made her question whether some parts of Appalachia should remain unexplored. No worries if you consider yourself an experienced outdoors person who knows how to handle yourself in the wilderness. Because Olivia had 15 years of backpacking experience, and it did not prepare her for what she encountered 3 days into what should have been a routine solo trip. It was September of 2018, and Olivia had planned this trip for months. She was an avid backpacker, the kind of person who found peace in isolation, who did her best thinking miles away from cell towers and paved roads. The Great Smoky Mountains National Forest offered hundreds of miles of trails, and she had chosen a route that would take her deep into the backcountry, far from the tourist areas where families posed for photos and complained about the lack of Wi-Fi. She wanted real wilderness, the kind where you could hike for days without seeing another human being. The first 2 days were perfect. Clear skies, moderate temperatures, and the kind of profound silence that only exists when you are truly alone in nature. She made camp each night, cooked her freeze-dried meals, read by headlamp, and slept the deep sleep of physical exhaustion. On the 3rd day, she left the marked trail system and followed an old logging road that her topographic map showed heading deeper into the national forest. The road had not been used in decades, was barely visible under encroaching vegetation, but it led to an area she had never explored before. She set up camp that evening in a small clearing, near where the logging road petered out into nothing. It was a good spot, flat and sheltered with a creek nearby for water. As she was organizing her gear, she heard something that made her stop and listen. Children's voices, laughter and conversation coming from somewhere close by in the forest. Her first thought was confusion. She was miles from any official campsite, miles from any trail. What were children doing out here? She walked toward the sound and found them in a meadow about 100 yards from her tent. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, maybe 8 to 10 years old, playing some kind of game that involved running in circles and laughing. They were wearing clothes that struck Olivia as odd immediately. Not modern hiking gear, but old-fashioned outfits that looked like something from a historical photograph. The boys wore wool trousers held up with suspenders, white cotton shirts with the sleeves rolled up. The girl wore a simple dress that came down to her ankles. All 3 were barefoot. Olivia approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. "Hello there," she called out. The children stopped playing and turned to look at her in perfect unison. They did not seem surprised to see her. They did not seem anything. They just looked at her with expressions that were completely neutral. "Are you kids okay?" Olivia asked. "Where are your parents?" The girl spoke. "We live down the hollow. We went walking and got turned around. We cannot find our way back." Her accent was thick, mountain dialect that Olivia recognized from talking to old-timers in Appalachian towns, but children today did not talk like that anymore. "I can help you," Olivia said. "Do you know which direction your house is?" The taller boy pointed deeper into the forest, away from where Olivia had come. "That way. Not far. You can take us." Everything in Olivia's outdoor ethics training said she should help lost children, but something felt deeply wrong about this situation. Children this young should not be this far from civilization. They should not be this calm about being lost. And their clothes, their bare feet, the way they all moved and spoke with such strange coordination. "Let me try to radio for help," Olivia said, pulling out her satellite communicator. The device was designed to work anywhere on Earth, to send emergency messages even in areas with no cell coverage. She pressed the power button. Nothing. The screen stayed dark. She pressed it again. Dead. "We do not need radio," the girl said. "You can just walk with us. We will show you where to go." The children started walking into the forest, not waiting to see if Olivia would follow. Against her better judgment, she did. She told herself she would walk with them for a little while, see if they actually knew where they were going, and if not, she would turn back and try to figure out some other way to help them. They walked as the sun began to set. The children moved through the darkening forest with complete confidence, never hesitating, never checking their direction. They did not use flashlights. They did not stumble over roots or rocks. They just walked, and Olivia found herself struggling to keep up, using her headlamp to navigate terrain that they seemed to see perfectly in the growing darkness. "How much further?" she called out. "Not far," all 3 children said simultaneously, the same words in the same tone, perfectly synchronized. An hour passed, then another. Olivia's headlamp illuminated dense forest that looked the same in every direction. They should have reached some kind of dwelling by now, or at least a road, a trail, some sign of human habitation. She pulled out her GPS unit to check their position. The screen showed her location as a wandering spiral, as if she had been walking in circles for the past 2 hours. That was impossible. They had been moving in a straight line. She had been watching the children the whole time. "We need to stop," Olivia said, her voice sharp with rising panic. "We need to stop right now and go back to my camp." The children stopped walking and turned around to face her. In the beam of her headlamp, she could see them clearly for the first time since they had entered the forest. Their eyes were wrong, completely black, solid black from edge to edge, like looking into empty wells. Olivia took a step backward and nearly fell. "You cannot leave now," the youngest boy said. "You came with us willingly. You agreed to follow us. Now you have to finish the walk." Olivia's mind raced through everything she knew about wilderness survival, about getting lost, about staying calm in emergencies. None of it applied to this. This was not getting lost. This was being led, being hunted. "No," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I'm going back now." She turned and started walking in what she thought was the direction they had come from. Behind her, she heard the children laugh, not the innocent laughter from when she had first seen them playing. This was different, colder, layered with something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Then she heard footsteps, not behind her but in front of her, to her sides, all around her. The children were somehow surrounding her, even though she could hear them laughing from the direction she had just left. Olivia started running. Branches whipped at her face and arms. Her backpack threw her off balance. She did not care. She crashed through underbrush, splashed through a creek she did not remember crossing, scrambled up an embankment on the far side. At the top, she tripped on a root and fell, rolling down the other side into another creek bed, this one deeper and rockier. She landed hard, felt her ankle twist, felt cold water soak through her pants. She lay still, listening. The forest was silent, except for her own ragged breathing and the sound of water flowing over rocks. No footsteps, no children's voices. She pulled herself into a sitting position and swept her headlamp beam around. Dense forest on all sides. Creek bed stretching away in both directions. No children. She sat there shivering, whether from cold or fear she could not tell, and waited for something to happen. Nothing did. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting silver light through the trees. Olivia did not move from the creek bed. She did not sleep. She sat with her back against a boulder, her can of bear spray in one hand and her knife in the other, and watched the forest. Sometime around dawn, she heard birds begin to sing. Normal birds, normal forest sounds. The world slowly filled with gray light, then gold. Nothing emerged from the trees. Nothing attacked her. When full daylight arrived, she forced herself to stand. Her ankle was swollen, but she could walk. She followed the creek bed downhill, reasoning that water always flows toward lower ground, toward civilization eventually. After maybe 20 minutes, she saw something that made her stop and stare. Her tent, her camp. Right there, less than 500 yards from where she had spent the night in the creek bed. She had walked for hours with those children, and somehow she had ended up in a circle that brought her right back to where she started. She packed her gear faster than she had ever packed in her life, ignoring the pain in her ankle, ignoring everything except the desperate need to get out of this forest. She did not care about the route she had planned, did not care about the camping trip she had looked forward to for months. She just needed to leave. She found a trail, any trail, and followed it. After an hour of hard hiking, she reached a ranger station. The ranger on duty took one look at her face and knew something was seriously wrong. Olivia told her story, expecting skepticism or dismissal. Instead, the ranger's expression grew very serious. He pulled out a file folder from a locked drawer in his desk. Inside were reports, 23 reports over the past 40 years, all describing encounters with children in old-fashioned clothing in remote areas of the park, all describing children who led hikers deeper into the forest. 17 of those 23 hikers had never been found. "You're lucky," the ranger said. "You're very lucky. Most people who follow them do not come back." He explained that there were legends among the Cherokee people who had lived in these mountains for thousands of years. Legends of the Nunhi, spirit people who appeared as children and led travelers astray. Some versions of the story said they were protective spirits testing the worthiness of visitors. Other versions said they were something darker, collecting souls or feeding on the energy of the lost. The modern manifestation seemed to be the Black-Eyed Children, always in groups of 3, always in the same kind of old-fashioned clothes, always knowing the forest in ways that no living person could. The ranger showed her a map with pins marking every reported encounter over the decades. The pins formed a pattern, concentrated in certain areas of the park, spreading out from those centers like veins or roots. Olivia left the park that day and has never returned. She developed severe anxiety about being in forests, panic attacks triggered by the sight of dense trees or the sound of children's laughter. She joined an online support group for people who claimed to have encountered the Black-Eyed Children, and was disturbed to find hundreds of members, all with variations of the same story. Children with black eyes appearing in impossible places, leading people astray, testing boundaries, playing games with human lives. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park has the highest number of unexplained disappearances of any national park in America. Over 100 people have vanished there in the past century. Most of them experienced hikers who should have known better than to get lost. The official explanation is usually exposure, animal attacks, falls into ravines. But Olivia wonders how many of those missing people saw 3 children in old-fashioned clothes. How many of them agreed to follow just for a little while, just to help, just to be kind? How many of them are still out there somewhere, walking in spirals through the dark woods, following children who will never lead them home? So I have a school bus story for you that is going to make you think very differently about the routes we drive every day and the passengers we think we know. This comes from a woman named Kaylin, and what happened during her morning route through rural Kentucky ended with 2 extra passengers who were never supposed to be there, who could not have been there, but who left marks that remain to this day. No worries if you think you understand the difference between the living and the dead, because what Kaylin experienced will blur that line in ways that will never let you see it clearly again. It was October of 2020, a Thursday morning, and Kaylin was driving the route she had driven for 15 years. She knew every curve, every stop, every pothole in the 43 miles of mountain roads that wound through isolated communities in eastern Kentucky. She knew which students got on at which stops, knew their names, knew their families. It was the kind of job where consistency mattered, where children needed stability and routine. Kaylin took pride in being that stability for the kids on her route. The morning was thick with fog, the kind that settles into Appalachian valleys and refuses to lift until noon. Visibility was maybe 30 feet. Kaylin drove slowly, carefully, running lights and flashers, taking each curve with the caution that fog demanded. She was coming up on Millstone Road, which was not technically a stop on her route when she saw them. 2 figures standing on the shoulder, small figures, child-sized. She slowed the bus and squinted through the fog. 2 children, a boy and a girl, standing perfectly still, waiting. Kaylin did not recognize them, which was strange because she knew every child in this district, but they were clearly waiting for the bus, standing right where a bus stop would be if there was one there. She pulled over and opened the door. The children climbed aboard without a word. The boy was maybe 10, the girl slightly younger. They wore clothing that looked wrong somehow, outdated in a way Kaylin could not immediately define. Dark colors, formal fabrics, styles that reminded her of photographs from her grandmother's childhood. "Morning," Kaylin said, as she said to every child every morning. The children did not respond. They walked down the aisle and sat in the front seat, the seat directly behind Kaylin, and sat with their hands folded in their laps, staring straight ahead. Kaylin watched them in her wide rearview mirror. "I do not think I have seen you 2 before," she said. "Did you just move to the area?" The children did not answer. They did not even blink. Kaylin felt the first cold touch of unease but pushed it down. Maybe they were shy. Maybe they were nervous about a new school. She closed the door and put the bus in gear, continuing her route. At the next official stop, 3 regular students got on, siblings who lived on a farm at the end of a long dirt driveway. The oldest, a 6th grader named Emma, started down the aisle toward her usual seat, then stopped. She stared at the 2 children in the front seat. Her younger brothers piled up behind her, and all 3 of them slowly backed away, pressing themselves against the opposite side of the bus, sliding into seats as far from the front as they could get. "Emma," Kaylin called. "Everything okay?" Emma did not answer. She was still staring at the two children, her face pale. Kaylin looked in her mirror at the children. They had not moved, had not turned around, had not acknowledged the other students in any way. They sat perfectly motionless, perfectly silent, staring forward. Kaylin continued driving, picking up more students at each stop, and the pattern repeated. Every child who got on the bus saw the two in the front seat and immediately moved as far away as possible. By the time she reached the school, her bus was packed with children pressed into the back half of the vehicle, leaving the entire front section empty except for those two silent, still figures. Kaylin pulled into the school loop and opened the door. "Okay, everyone, let us go," she called. The regular students filed off quickly, practically running to get away from the bus. The two children in the front seat did not move. Kaylin turned in her seat to face them. "This is your stop," she said. "Time to get off." The children finally turned their heads to look at her. In perfect unison, like puppets on the same string, they said, "We go further." Kaylin felt her stomach clench. "No, this is the school. Everyone gets off here. This is the end of the line." The children's expressions did not change. "We go further," they repeated. Same words, same inflection, same eerie synchronization. Kaylin stood up and walked toward them, preparing to physically escort them off if necessary. She had never had to do that in 15 years, but there was a first time for everything. "Come on now," she said, trying to keep her voice firm but kind. "You need to get off the bus." She reached out to take the girl's arm. The moment her fingers touched the child's sleeve, she saw their eyes. Up close, with no dashboard or distance to obscure them, she could see clearly. The children's eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, no pupils. Just solid, endless black, like looking into empty space. Kaylin jerked her hand back and stumbled against the seat across the aisle. "You invited us on," the boy said. "Now you must take us home." Kaylin's mind was racing, fighting between rationality and the primal terror screaming through her nervous system. "I need to call my supervisor," she managed to say. She pulled her radio from her belt and keyed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Bus 47. I have a situation." The radio crackled with static so loud she had to pull it away from her ear. When the static cleared, her supervisor's voice came through, normal and unconcerned. "Go ahead. 47. Kaylin looked back at the front seat. Empty. The children were gone. She spun around, checking the aisle, the back of the bus, under the seats. Nothing. The bus was empty. She keyed the radio again. "Never mind, dispatch. False alarm." Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the radio. She walked down the aisle to the front seat where the children had been sitting. The seat was cold, much colder than it should have been. Cold enough that she could see her breath when she leaned close. She checked the bus's camera system, the one that recorded everything that happened on board. The footage would show what had happened, would prove she was not losing her mind. She pulled up the morning's recording on the small monitor in the driver's area. The video showed her pulling over at Millstone Road, showed the door opening, showed nothing getting on, showed her driving and picking up students who pressed themselves to the back of the bus for no visible reason, showed an empty front seat the entire time. Kaylin watched the footage 3 times, fast forward, rewind, freeze frame. The children never appeared, but she could see the other students' reactions, could see them staring at something, backing away from something. She was not the only one who had seen them. She called her supervisor and told him she needed to go home, that she was sick. He could hear something in her voice and agreed without argument. The school's principal called her that evening. "I talked to some of the students from your bus," he said carefully. "They told me something strange about this morning. They said there were 2 children sitting in the front seat who they had never seen before, children who did not get off at the school." Kaylin closed her eyes. "You believe them?" she asked. The principal was quiet for a long moment. "I pulled some old records," he said finally. October 15th, 1952. School bus accident on Route 114. The old highway, that used to run parallel to where your route goes now. Bus went off the road in heavy fog, went down a ravine. 14 children died. Kaylin felt her blood go cold. 14, the principal continued. 12 of the children were identified and buried by their families. 2 were never identified. No one ever claimed them. They were buried in the county cemetery in unmarked graves. A boy and a girl, estimated ages 9 and 10. According to the accident report, they were sitting in the front seat directly behind the driver. What happened to the driver? Kaylin asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know. He survived the initial accident, the principal said. Died 3 days later in the hospital. Before he died, he told the investigators that 2 children had gotten on his bus that morning at a stop that was not on his route. Children he did not recognize. He said they told him they wanted to go further, and when he tried to make them get off, he lost control of the bus. The principal paused. This is not the first report we have had. Every 10 or 15 years, going back to 1956, someone reports seeing children on the buses who should not be there. Always the same description. Always on foggy mornings in October. Always sitting in the front seat. Always saying they want to go further. Kaylin felt tears running down her face. What do they want? She whispered. I do not know, the principal said, but you are the first driver who has seen them and lived to talk about it. Every other driver who encountered them had an accident within 24 hours. Kaylin did not drive the bus the next day or the next week. She took a month of personal leave. During that time, she started having visions, not dreams, because she was awake when they happened. She would be doing something normal, making coffee or watching television, and suddenly she would see images flash through her mind. Car accidents that had not happened yet. A truck jackknifing on ice. A minivan running a red light. A motorcycle losing control on a wet road. Each vision was brief but intensely detailed, and each came with a location and time. The first time it happened, she dismissed it as stress, imagination trauma. The second time, she wrote down the details. The third time, she called the police and reported what she had seen. They thought she was crazy until the accident she described happened exactly as she had seen it, at exactly the time and place she had specified. She called them again before the next vision came true, and the next. After she'd accurately predicted 4 accidents, prevented 2 deaths by warning people to avoid certain routes at certain times, the local police started listening to her, even if they did not understand how she knew. Kaylin never went back to driving buses. She could not. Every time she saw a school bus, she would look at the front seat and wonder if the children were there, invisible to the driver, waiting to finish the ride they started 70 years ago. She works from home now, doing freelance bookkeeping, staying away from schools and buses and foggy October mornings. But the visions have never stopped. She sees accidents before they happen, sees death approaching on highways and intersections, and she does what she can to warn people, to change outcomes, to save lives that would otherwise be lost. She believes the children were not trying to harm her specifically. She believes they touched her because she was kind to them, because she stopped and let them on when they had been passed by so many times before. She believes they gave her this ability because they understand what it means to die on a bus route, to be forgotten, to have no one claim you. And maybe in their own way, they're trying to prevent other children, other families from suffering the same fate. Or maybe they're still trying to finish that ride, still asking every driver they can reach to take them further, to take them home, to finally let them rest in a place where someone remembers their names and knows they mattered. Either way, if you drive through rural Kentucky on foggy October mornings and you see 2 children at a stop that is not on your route, wearing clothes from another time, waiting with their hands folded and their eyes too dark to see into, maybe do not stop. Maybe just keep driving, because some passengers are not looking for a ride to school. Some passengers have been riding for 70 years and will never, ever get off. So I wanted to share with you today a story about urban exploring that uncovered something far worse than ghosts and led to a murder investigation that authorities are still trying to make sense of. This comes from a woman named Janessa and what she and her friends found in an abandoned farmhouse in the Virginia mountains turned a night of adventure into a nightmare that exposed horrors, both supernatural and disturbingly human. No worries if you think you can tell the difference between the dead and the living, because Janessa learned that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that blur that line completely. It was August of 2017, and Janessa was 23 years old, working a boring office job and spending her weekends doing something that actually made her feel alive. She and 3 friends were amateur urban explorers, documenting abandoned buildings throughout Appalachia. They had a small YouTube channel, nothing major, just a few hundred subscribers who enjoyed watching them explore forgotten places. They followed all the rules. Never break anything, never steal, never go alone, always tell someone where you're going. They had found the farmhouse through a local history forum. It had been abandoned since the late 1980s, sitting at the end of a long dirt road about 30 miles outside of Roanoke. The property was not posted with no trespassing signs, and according to county records, it was in some kind of estate limbo with no clear owner. Perfect for exploration. They arrived at sunset on a Saturday, 4 of them with cameras, flashlights, and the kind of excitement that comes from walking into the unknown. The house was in terrible condition. Roof partially collapsed, windows broken, vines crawling up the walls and through the doors. Nature was slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned, but as they explored the first floor, they found something strange. Most of the house was exactly what you would expect: decayed furniture, water damage, years of neglect. But there was one room, a bedroom upstairs, that looked almost preserved. 2 small beds with blankets still tucked in, toys on a shelf, plastic and metal toys from the 1980s, clothes in the closet, small clothes, children's clothes, photographs on the wall showing a family. Mother, father, 2 children, a boy and a girl. "This is weird," Janessa's friend Marcus said, filming the room. "Why is this room untouched?" Janessa looked closer at the photographs. The family looked happy, normal. The photos were dated, handwritten dates on the borders: 1985, 1986, 1987, then nothing. The room felt wrong, too preserved, like a shrine or a memorial. As they documented it, Janessa noticed the temperature dropping. Her breath started showing in the air, even though it was August and humid outside. Their cameras started malfunctioning. Marcus's video camera flickered and died. Janessa's phone camera app kept crashing. The flashlights they had brought began to dim. "Battery problems," Sarah, another friend, said, tapping her flashlight. But all of them, at the same time. They moved down to the basement, figuring they would finish the exploration and leave. Something about this place was making everyone uncomfortable. The basement door was at the back of the house, and it had been nailed shut from the outside. Multiple boards, multiple layers, as if someone had desperately wanted to keep people out or keep something in. They pried the boards off carefully and opened the door. The smell hit them immediately. Old, stale air mixed with something sweet and rotten. They descended the stairs with flashlights cutting through darkness that seemed almost solid. The basement was not empty. It had been converted into some kind of living space. Sleeping bags on the floor, food wrappers, recent ones, granola bar wrappers, and chip bags from brands that still existed. Empty water bottles. And the walls, covered completely in drawings. Children's drawings, but wrong. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, taped and tacked to every surface. They all depicted the same thing: stick figures with solid black circles for heads. No faces, no features, just black circles. And in every drawing, the black-headed figures were holding hands with smaller figures, leading them somewhere. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. Janessa agreed, but as she turned to go back up the stairs, she heard something. A sound coming from the far corner of the basement, from a root cellar with a heavy wooden door. Scratching. Light scratching, like small fingers on wood. Marcus pointed his flashlight at the door. "Hello?" he called out. The scratching stopped. Then a voice, a child's voice, muffled by the door. "Help us. Please help us." Every instinct screamed at Janessa to run, but the voice was a child's voice. If there were children locked in that cellar, they had to help. They approached the door together and pulled it open. 2 children huddled in the corner, a boy and a girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old. They were filthy, covered in dirt, wearing clothes that were torn and stained. Their hair was matted. They looked malnourished, sick. And their eyes, in the flashlight beam, looked completely black. But children's eyes can look black in certain lights, Janessa told herself. These were real children who needed real help. "It is okay," she said gently. "We are going to get you out of here. Where are your parents?" The children stood up slowly. "He keeps us here," the girl whispered. "He makes us wait. He brings others." The boy pointed at the walls with the drawings. "They came before. They are gone now. He took them." Before Janessa could process what that meant, she heard footsteps above them. Heavy footsteps on the first floor. Someone else was in the house. Marcus grabbed Janessa's arm. "We need to go now," he hissed. But the children grabbed Janessa's arms first, both of them at once, and their grip was impossibly strong. Their small hands felt like steel bands, cold and unyielding. "You see us," the girl said. "You are the first ones who see us." Sarah screamed. The others turned and saw a man standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, blocking their exit. He was holding a tire iron, and his face was twisted with rage. "You should not be here," he said. "This is private property. Those children are mine." Marcus moved toward him. "Those children are kidnapped. We are calling the police right now." The man swung the tire iron, catching Marcus across the shoulder. Marcus went down hard. Sarah and the fourth friend, Tyler, rushed the man, trying to overpower him. It became violent chaos in the confined space. Janessa tried to help, tried to move, but the children still held her arms in that impossible grip. And then the children let go. They released her and turned toward the man with a speed that was not human. They crossed the basement in a blur and attacked him. The man screamed. He swung the tire iron at them, but they were too fast, too many angles, moving in ways that bodies should not move. He ran, scrambling up the basement stairs with the children pursuing him in silence. Janessa and her friends heard him running through the house above, heard crashing and banging and more screaming, then silence. Complete, absolute silence. They waited 5 minutes that felt like hours before they dared to move. When they finally climbed the basement stairs, they found the man's body in the upstairs hallway. He was dead, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror, but there was no obvious cause of death. No blood, no wounds, nothing. He just looked like he had been scared to death. The children were nowhere to be found. Janessa called 911 with shaking hands. The police came, then state police, then FBI. The investigation that followed revealed horrors that made the encounter with the Black-Eyed Children almost seem merciful by comparison. The man was identified through fingerprints. He had been living on the property illegally for months. DNA evidence in the basement matched 2 missing children cases from Kentucky and Tennessee. Both children had been reported missing 3 months earlier from different locations, different families. The bodies were found buried on the property, shallow graves in the woods behind the house. Forensic analysis showed the children had died within days of being taken. They had been dead for 3 months. Whatever Janessa and her friends encountered in that basement, they were not the missing children. They could not have been. The timeline made it impossible, but the drawings on the walls were real. The food wrappers were real. Someone or something had been living in that basement. The police theorized the man had created the drawings himself during some kind of psychotic break, that he had been living with the bodies of his victims, that Janessa and her friends had interrupted, whatever sick ritual he was performing. But that did not explain what they had seen, what they had touched, what had attacked the man with strength and speed that left no marks but stopped his heart. The investigation went deeper. The farmhouse had belonged to a family in the 1980s. The father had murdered his wife and 2 children in that house in 1987, then disappeared. He was never found. The children's bodies had been discovered in their bedroom, the same bedroom that Janessa had found, preserved like a shrine. The county had tried to sell the property, but no one wanted a murder house. It had sat empty for 30 years, until that man moved in and brought new victims, until he created his own horror on top of old horror. And something in that house, something that had been there since 1987, had used the forms of children to lure help, to bring witnesses, to finally stop the cycle. The farmhouse burned down 2 weeks later under mysterious circumstances, before the investigation could be completed. The fire was so intense, so complete, that investigators suspected accelerants, but they could never prove it. The property was eventually seized by the county and turned into a nature preserve, with the stipulation that no structures could ever be built there again. Janessa's friend Marcus recovered from his shoulder injury. Sarah and Tyler left the state and stopped urban exploring completely. Janessa stayed but gave up the hobby that had brought her to that house. She still has nightmares about the grip of those small cold hands on her arms, about eyes that were solid black in the flashlight beam, about children who whispered that others had come before, that he had taken them all. She wonders sometimes if the Black-Eyed Children were the spirits of the original victims from 1987, using the only form they remembered to seek justice. Or if they were something older, something that existed in that place before any of the horror, something that fed on violence and death and wore the shapes of children, because that shape could get closest to people before revealing what it really was. Either way, she knows that she was allowed to leave that basement alive because the children needed witnesses. They needed someone to find the bodies, to stop the man, to finally bring light to the darkness that had festered in that place for decades. And sometimes, late at night, she still sees them, standing at the edge of her vision, small figures with black eyes, watching, waiting, making sure she never forgets what she saw, what she knows, what walks among us wearing faces that we trust until the moment we look close enough to see the truth underneath. So, I have a hospital story for you that is going to make you question what we really know about the places where people die. This comes from a nurse named Kiana and what happened during her night shift at a small rural hospital in eastern Kentucky involved 2 children who appeared in a ward that should not have existed, in a room that had been sealed for decades. No worries if you think hospitals are places governed by logic and medical science, because what Kiana experienced will show you that some places hold on to death in ways that science cannot explain. It was February of 2022, and Kiana was working the night shift at Harlan County Medical Center, a small hospital serving remote Appalachian communities. It was a 30-bed facility, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the staff had worked together for years, where nothing surprising ever happened. Night shifts were usually quiet. Most nights they had maybe 2 or 3 patients total, elderly folks with pneumonia or diabetics with blood sugar issues. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would keep Kiana from finishing the nursing degree paperwork she was working on between rounds. That particular Tuesday night, they had exactly 2 patients. Both were in their 70s. Both were on the medical surgical floor. Both were stable and sleeping. Kiana did her 3 a.m. rounds, checked vitals, adjusted IV drips, documented everything properly. The hospital was silent except for the hum of machines and the occasional beep of a monitor. She returned to the nurse's station and was updating charts when she heard something that made her look up. Footsteps. Small footsteps. Like children running, coming from the hallway that led to the old pediatric ward. The pediatric ward had been closed since the hospital renovated in 2015. They did not have enough pediatric cases to justify a separate unit, so they had converted that wing into storage. Kiana stood and walked toward the sound, flashlight in hand, figuring some equipment had fallen, or maybe there were mice. She turned the corner into the old pediatric hallway and saw them. 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, standing in the doorway of room 208. They were wearing hospital gowns, the old-fashioned kind with the ties in the back, and they were staring at her without blinking. "Hey, how did you kids get in here?" Kiana called out, walking toward them. Children were not supposed to be in this wing. Children were not supposed to be in the hospital at all at 3 a.m. The children did not answer. They turned in perfect unison and walked into room 208. Kiana followed, reaching for her radio to call security. She stepped into the room and stopped cold. Room 208 was supposed to be a storage room, had been for 7 years. But it looked like a functioning pediatric room. 2 hospital beds, both with children's linens. Medical equipment from decades ago, machines that the hospital had not used since Kiana was a child herself. Toys on a shelf. And the 2 children sitting on the beds, staring at her with eyes that were completely impossibly black. Kiana backed out of the room and ran to the nurse's station. She grabbed the phone and called the front desk security. "We have 2 children in the old pediatric wing. I do not know how they got in. I need you up here now." She pulled up the hospital records on her computer while she waited. No pediatric admissions, no children in the building. The last pediatric patient had been discharged 3 days ago, and that had been a teenager with a broken arm, not young children in hospital gowns. Security Officer Davis arrived, looking annoyed at being called away from his crossword puzzle. "What is going on?" Kiana led him to room 208. "There are 2 kids in there. I do not know who they are or how they got in." She pushed open the door. The room was exactly as it should have been. A storage room filled with boxes of supplies, old office furniture, stacks of outdated medical textbooks, no beds, no toys, no children. Davis looked at her with concern. "Kiana, there's nobody here. Are you feeling okay?" Kiana pushed past him and searched the room, looking behind boxes, checking the closet. Nothing. "They were here," she insisted. 2 kids in hospital gowns, sitting on beds that were right here. Davis put a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe you should take a break. You have been working too many doubles." Kiana pulled away and walked back into the hallway. The children were standing there, right there in the hallway, 10 feet away. "There!" she shouted, pointing. "Right there. Do you not see them?" Davis looked where she was pointing. "Kiana, there is nothing there. I do not see anything." The children smiled at her. Identical smiles, cold and knowing. Then they spoke in unison. "Only the marked can see us. You have been chosen." Kiana pulled out her phone and took a picture. The children were clearly visible on her screen, standing in the hallway. Hospital gowns hanging on their thin frames, black eyes reflecting the camera flash. She turned the phone to show Davis. "Look at the picture. They are right there." Davis looked at her phone screen, and his face showed genuine confusion. "Kiana, that is just an empty hallway. I do not see any kids." Kiana looked at her phone. On the screen, clear as day, 2 children standing in the corridor. She looked up at the hallway. The children were still there, still staring at her. She looked back at Davis. He genuinely could not see them, only her. Only the marked can see us. What did that mean? The children turned and walked down the hallway, moving without sound, their bare feet not making any noise on the linoleum floor. Kiana followed, ignoring Davis calling after her. The children led her to a door at the end of the hall, a door marked with faded numbers, 208. But she had just been in 2U8. It was back the other way. How? Could there be another room? 208. The children opened the door and went inside. Kiana followed. The room was freezing, so cold her breath came out in visible clouds. It was a pediatric room, set up exactly as rooms would have been decades ago. And there were more than 2 children now. There were dozens of them, filling the room, standing along the walls, sitting on beds, all wearing hospital gowns, all with eyes that were solid black. They all turned to look at her simultaneously, and the effect was like being stared at by a nightmare made of repetition and wrongness. "We have always been here," they said in perfect unison, all those voices speaking as one. "In room 208, we died here. We cannot leave. And now you see us. Now you're marked. Now you will join us." The children began to move toward her, slowly, their movements synchronized like a choreographed dance. Kiana backed toward the door, but it had closed behind her. She grabbed the handle and pulled. It was locked, or stuck, or maybe the door had never been real in the first place. The children reached out with small, cold hands. They touched her face, her arms, her hands. Everywhere they touched, Kiana felt cold burn into her skin, and with each touch came visions. She saw children dying in this room, dozens of them over decades. She saw an epidemic in 1995, meningitis sweeping through the hospital. She saw 2 siblings, a boy and a girl, dying alone because quarantine protocols prevented their parents from being with them. She saw their last moments, their fear, their confusion, their desperate cries for their mother who could not come, who was being held back by nurses and doctors who were following procedures designed to save lives, but instead left children to die alone and terrified. She saw other deaths too, other children in other years, all in room 208, all alone, all forgotten, and she understood that the children were not evil. They were trapped. They had died in fear and isolation, and something about that death in that specific room had bound them there, unable to move on, unable to leave, repeating the trauma of their last moments over and over for eternity. Kiana collapsed. The cold was too much. The visions were too much. The weight of all that accumulated sorrow and terror was more than her mind could process. She felt herself falling, felt the cold floor rise up to meet her. Then nothing. She woke up in a hospital bed. Not in room 208, but in the emergency department. Davis was there, and her supervisor, and a doctor she recognized from day shift. "You have been unconscious for 3 hours," the doctor said. "Your core body temperature was 79 degrees when we found you. That is severe hypothermia. In a heated building. We cannot explain it." Kiana sat up slowly. Her body ached everywhere, but especially where the children had touched her. She looked at her arms. Frostbite. Actual frostbite. Dark patches on her skin where small handprints were clearly visible. Her supervisor pulled up a chair. "Kiana, I need to tell you something. This is not the first time this has happened. Room 208, the old room 208, has a history. We do not talk about it because we do not want to scare staff. But you are the 7th person to report seeing children there. You are the 7th person to be marked." She pulled out a confidential file. Inside were reports dating back to 1996. 7 nurses, 2 doctors, 4 orderlies. All reported seeing children with black eyes in room 208. All developed hypothermia despite being indoors. All showed signs of frostbite in the shape of handprints, and all of them had died within 12 months of the encounter. "Died of what?" Kiana asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her supervisor looked grim. "Different things. Car accident, sudden heart attack, aneurysm, cancer that appeared out of nowhere and progressed impossibly fast, a fall downstairs. Each one different, but all within a year. We have tried everything, blessed the room, had Native American elders perform ceremonies, even had the room demolished and rebuilt, but it always comes back. Room 208 always exists, even when the blueprints say it should not." Kiana left the hospital that day and never returned to work. She could not. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those children. Every time the temperature dropped, she felt their hands on her skin. She moved 4 states away to Arizona, to heat and desert, in places as far from Appalachian Mountains as she could get. But the children followed, not physically, but in her mind, in her dreams, in the moments between waking and sleeping. 10 months after the encounter, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor, glioblastoma, stage 4, inoperable, with a prognosis of 6 to 8 months. She underwent radiation, chemotherapy, experimental treatments. Against all odds, the tumor shrank. It did not just stop growing, it actually disappeared. Her doctors called it a miracle, a spontaneous remission that happened in less than 1% of cases. Kiana knows it was not a miracle. She knows the children showed her death, marked her for it, but somehow she survived. She is the first person marked by the children of room 208 to live past the 1-year mark. She still sees them sometimes, standing at the edges of her vision, watching, waiting. She does not know if they are angry that she survived, or if they are simply patient, knowing that eventually everyone they mark will join them in that cold room where children died alone and were never allowed to leave. So I have a story for you today about faith being tested in the most literal and terrifying way possible. This comes from a man named Kaladin, and what happened during a Sunday morning service at his small mountain church forced an entire congregation to confront the darkness they had been hiding behind smiles and hymns. No worries if you think churches are places of safety and sanctuary, because what Kaladin witnessed proved that sometimes the most sacred spaces become stages for the most profound revelations, and not all revelations are comfortable. It was November of 2019, late in the month, when the first real snow was falling in the mountains of West Virginia. Kaladin had been a deacon at Covenant Baptist Church for 12 years, a small congregation of about 40 faithful members who gathered every Sunday in a white clapboard building that had stood at the same crossroads since 1923. These were people Kaladin had known his entire adult life. He had baptized their children, buried their parents, counseled them through divorces and addictions and losses. This was not just his church, this was his family. Sunday morning service started at 10 a.m., same as it had for nearly a century. Kaladin arrived early as always, helped the pastor set up, greeted people as they arrived. The snow was coming down heavier now, fat flakes that stuck to coats and hats. Everyone was in good spirits despite the weather, happy to be together, happy to be warm inside while winter raged outside. The service began with hymns, old hymns that everyone knew by heart, voices raised in familiar harmonies. They were halfway through the second hymn when the door at the back of the church opened. Cold air rushed in, and 2 children walked down the aisle. A boy and a girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, soaking wet despite the snow falling outside. They wore old-fashioned Sunday clothes, dark and formal, styles that Kaladin recognized from photographs of the church from the 1960s. Their hair was plastered to their heads with water, not melted snow, but water, as if they had been swimming. They walked to the back pew and sat down perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Pastor Wilkins paused in his conducting, smiled, and spoke into the microphone. "Well, good morning to our young visitors. Welcome to Covenant Baptist. Are your parents here?" The children did not respond. They did not even look at the pastor. They just sat, hands folded in their laps, water dripping from their clothes onto the wooden floor. Kaladin stood from his seat in the deacon's row and walked toward them. Something was very wrong. The children were too still, too wet, too silent. As Kaladin approached, he saw their eyes. Completely black, like looking into wells with no bottom. He stumbled and caught himself on a pew. Several other congregation members noticed his reaction and turned to look at the children. Kaladin heard gasps, heard someone whisper, "Lord, have mercy." The children turned their heads in perfect unison to look at the congregation, and their mouths opened in identical smiles. "We have come with a message," they said together, voices overlapping perfectly, creating a harmony that was beautiful and horrible. "We have come to speak truth." Pastor Wilkins found his voice. "Children, this is the house of God. If you have something to say, you may share during testimony time, but right now we are worshiping." The children stood. They moved down the aisle toward the front of the church, walking in perfect synchronization. their wet shoes making no sound on the wooden floor. "We will speak now," they said. "We have been waiting to speak. We have been silent in the water for so long, but now we speak." They climbed the steps to the altar area and stood facing the congregation. Pastor Wilkins moved toward them, one hand raised as if to escort them away, and froze. He tried to move and could not. His body was locked in place, face showing confusion and fear, but unable to make his muscles obey his commands. The children began to speak. They spoke in unison, that disturbing perfect harmony, and they spoke names. "Thomas Wilkins," they said, pointing at the pastor. "You have lain with Janet Harris 12 times in the past year while your wife believed you were visiting the sick." Janet Harris, choir member, face going white in the third row, her husband sitting beside her, turning slowly to look at her with dawning horror. "Michael Henderson," the children continued, pointing to an elderly man in the front pew. "You have stolen $47,000 from your business partners over 15 years, and you have tithed 10% of those stolen funds to this church to ease your conscience." The congregation erupted into chaos, people shouting denials, people crying, people trying to leave but finding the doors would not open. The children's voices rose above the noise, clear and unstoppable. "Susan Pierce, you have beaten your daughter 17 times in the past month and told her if she tells anyone, you will send her away." Susan Pierce, Sunday school teacher, beloved member, screaming that it was a lie even as her teenage daughter burst into tears. "David Collins, you have been taking prescription medications from your mother's hospice care and selling them, and you have prayed each Sunday for forgiveness while planning to do it again." On and on the children went, name after name, sin after sin, adultery and theft and abuse and addiction and lies. Secrets that had been buried for years, decades, entire lifetimes. The children knew everything. They spoke with absolute certainty. And with each revelation, the person named would either break down in tears or start screaming denials that rang hollow in the charged air of the sanctuary. Kaladin listened to it all, frozen in place like everyone else, unable to move, unable to leave, forced to bear witness. And he knew his turn was coming. He had his own secrets, sins he had convinced himself were not that bad, were private matters between him and God. Pornography addiction that he had struggled with for 5 years. Money he had taken from the building fund to cover gambling debts, money he planned to pay back but never had. He waited for the children to call his name, to expose him in front of everyone he had counseled and comforted and judged. The children turned to look directly at him. "Kaladin Price," they said. His heart stopped. "You carry shame that is eating you from inside. You believe you are unworthy to serve God. You are correct." The words hit him like physical blows. "But your recognition of your unworthiness is the beginning of true faith. Confession is the door that has been locked. Open it." The children's black eyes bored into him. "Speak truth and be released. Hide truth and be consumed." Kaladin felt something break inside him. He opened his mouth and heard himself speak. "I have a pornography addiction. I have stolen from the church. I have lied to everyone here about who I am." The words poured out, and with each admission, he felt weight lifting from his chest. He sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I am so sorry. I have failed you all. I have failed God." And like a dam breaking, others began to confess. Pastor Wilkins, still frozen in place at the altar, began to weep and admit his affairs. Others stood and spoke their truths, voices overlapping, some shouting, some whispering, but all of them confessing the things the children had exposed and the things they had not yet said. The church filled with the sound of people breaking, people releasing secrets that had poisoned them for years. As the confessions flowed, the children began to change. Their forms flickered, became translucent, and for brief moments, Kaladin could see through them. He saw not children, but something else, something that wore the shape of children like a costume. Then even that faded, and he saw what might have been their true forms. Two shapes of pure light, or pure darkness. He could not tell which, could not comprehend what he was seeing. The children spoke one final time. Truth has been spoken. Shame has been released. The waters will recede. Then they vanished, simply ceased to exist between one moment and the next. The doors to the church swung open, and cold wind and snow blew in. People could move again. The spell, or whatever it had been, was broken. The congregation sat in stunned silence for a long time. Pastor Wilkins finally moved, came down from the altar, and sat in the front pew with his head in his hands. Someone turned off the live stream camera that had been recording the service. Someone else closed the doors against the cold. Slowly, people began to talk. Not about leaving or pretending this had not happened, but about what came next. How do you rebuild when every secret has been exposed? Kaladin did research in the following days while the church grappled with what had happened. He found records in the County Historical Society. In 1967, 2 children had drowned in the pond on the church property during a church picnic. A boy and a girl, siblings, ages 9 and 10. The drowning had been ruled accidental, but there were whispers at the time that one of the church members had pushed them in during an argument, that it had been murder covered up by the community to protect one of their own. No investigation, no arrests, just 2 children buried, and a church that moved on as if it had never happened. This was the 5th time the children had appeared, according to church records that Kaladin found in a locked cabinet in the pastor's office. 1967, the year of the drowning. 1980, 1993, 2006, and now 2019, roughly every 13 years. Each time they appeared during a service, each time they spoke truths that no one wanted to hear, and each time people whose sins they exposed died within months. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents, cancer, all natural causes. All people who had been marked by the children's revelations. 5 members of the congregation died in the 3 months following that November service. All 5 had been named by the children. All 5 had refused to confess their sins fully, had tried to minimize or justify or explain away what they had done. The ones who confessed fully, who held nothing back, survived. Kaladin survived. Pastor Wilkins survived, though he resigned and his marriage ended. Janet Harris survived and left town. Michael Henderson survived and went to prison for fraud after turning himself in. The church underwent a painful reformation. Half the congregation left, unable to face each other after what had been revealed. New people came, drawn by stories of the church where truth had been spoken. Covenant Baptist became known throughout the region as a place where honesty was valued above comfort, where confession was not just a religious word, but a practiced discipline. Kaladin stayed on as deacon, his own sins known to everyone, his recovery ongoing and public. The pond was drained and filled in. A memorial was placed there for the 2 children who drowned in 1967, finally giving them recognition that had been denied for 50 years. Their names were spoken aloud, their short lives remembered, their deaths acknowledged as the tragedy it was rather than the accident the community had pretended it to be. Kaladin still thinks about that Sunday morning. He thinks about the children's black eyes, about their perfect harmony, about the weight of exposed secrets crushing down on a congregation that had built its fellowship on polite lies. He thinks about how religion can become a mask people wear to hide their worst selves, and how sometimes that mask needs to be torn away completely for real faith to begin. He believes the children were not demons, but instruments of something beyond human understanding, justice or judgment or divine revelation. He is not sure which, maybe all 3. He knows only that he witnessed truth spoken with power that could not be denied, and that truth destroyed comfortable lies, but created the possibility of genuine redemption. And he knows that in 13 years, if he's still alive, if the church still stands, the children will come again. They will walk through the doors during a Sunday service, soaking wet though no rain falls, wearing clothes from another era, and they will speak truths that no one wants to hear, and he will welcome them because he has learned that the most terrifying thing is not the revelation of our sins, but the slow poison of carrying them in silence until we forget we are dying from the inside out. So I wanted to share with you today a story about working night shift in an isolated place where something inhuman exposed something very human and very evil. This comes from a man named Jackson, and what happened during his shift at a remote Appalachian gas station involved two children who appeared from nowhere and triggered a chain of events that would save lives and expose a network of horror that had been operating in plain sight for years. No worries if you think you understand the difference between supernatural evil and human evil, because Jackson learned that sometimes they work together in ways that will haunt you forever. It was March of 2021, and Jackson was 20 years old, a college student working night shifts at a 24-hour truck stop on Route 23 in eastern Tennessee. It was one of those places that existed to serve long-haul truckers, sitting at the intersection of two highways that cut through the Appalachian Mountains, isolated, surrounded by forest, the nearest town 15 miles in either direction. The pay was good because no one else wanted to work alone out there from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. But Jackson needed the money for tuition, and the shifts gave him time to study when business was slow. Most nights were routine. Truckers came in for coffee and snacks, paid for diesel, used the restrooms, and moved on. Jackson would read textbooks between customers, stock shelves, clean, and count the hours until sunrise. This particular night started like any other. Quiet. A few trucks came and went. By 1 a.m., Jackson was alone in the store, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, security cameras recording empty aisles. Then he saw them through the window. Two children walking out of the woods behind the gas station, moving through the parking lot toward the front door. A boy and a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing dirty clothes and no shoes, at 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. Every alarm bell in Jackson's head went off. He moved to the door as they approached, ready to lock it if needed. But his training said, if children were in trouble, you helped them. The children pushed through the door, and the electronic chime sounded. They stood just inside, looking around with expressions that showed no fear, no distress, nothing. Just blank, neutral stares. "Hey, are you kids okay?" Jackson asked. "Where are your parents?" The girl pointed vaguely toward the woods. "They're coming soon," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. Jackson grabbed his phone to call police, but he had no signal, which was normal for this location. The landline was for emergencies. "Okay, let me get you some water and something to eat while we figure this out," Jackson said, moving behind the counter. He pulled 2 bottles of water from the cooler and a package of cookies from the shelf. The children took the items but did not open them. They just held them, standing perfectly still in the middle of the store. Their eyes, in the harsh fluorescent light, looked wrong, too dark, almost black. Jackson told himself it was the lighting, the late hour, his tired eyes playing tricks. He picked up the landline to call for a welfare check. The line was dead. He tapped the receiver. Nothing. No dial tone, no static, just dead silence. He looked at his cell phone again. Still no signal. The children had not moved. "What are your names?" Jackson asked, trying to keep them calm, trying to stay calm himself. "Where do you live?" The children spoke in perfect unison. "They are coming soon." 2 hours passed. The children did not move from their spot in the middle of the store. They did not eat or drink. They did not speak unless Jackson asked them a question, and then they only repeated the same phrase. "They are coming soon." No cars came, no truck stopped. The normally busy truck stop was completely dead, as if the universe had forgotten this place existed. Jackson's unease had grown into full fear. Something was very, very wrong. At 3:15 a.m., A semi-truck pulled into the lot. Jackson felt relief flood through him. Another person, a witness, someone to help him figure out what to do with these children. The driver came into the store, a man in his 40s wearing a trucker cap and stained jacket. He saw the children and froze. His face went white. He actually stumbled backward, hand reaching for the door. "No," the man said. "No, not here, not now." The children turned to face him. In perfect synchronization, they tilted their heads. "You have taken others like us," they said together. "Now you pay." The driver pulled a gun from inside his jacket. Jackson dropped behind the counter, heart hammering. "Stay back," the driver shouted. "Stay the hell back." He pointed the gun at the children with shaking hands. "I do not know what you are, but you are not getting me." The children walked toward him, slow, steady steps, completely unafraid of the weapon. The driver fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Jackson saw the bullet pass through the girl's chest and shatter a display behind her. No blood, no impact. The girl kept walking. The driver fired again and again, emptying his gun, bullets passing through both children as if they were made of smoke. When the gun clicked empty, the driver turned and ran for his truck. The children were faster. They moved in a blur, covering the distance to the door before the driver could reach it. They appeared inside the truck cab, visible through the windshield, before the driver had even touched the door handle. Jackson watched through the store window as the truck began to shake violently. The interior lights flashed on and off. The driver was screaming, his voice audible even through the glass and metal. After maybe 30 seconds that felt like hours, the truck stopped shaking. The driver crashed through the windshield from inside, showering glass everywhere, falling to the pavement in a bleeding heap. He crawled toward the store, leaving a trail of blood. "Call the police," he gasped as Jackson came out from behind the counter. "Call them now. I will tell them everything. The routes, the locations, the people involved. Just get them here. Please." Jackson tried the phones again. Suddenly they worked. Cell signal was back. Landline had a dial tone. He called 911, hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. While he waited for police, the driver confessed. Words poured out of him between gasps of pain and terror. He was part of a trafficking network that used these remote truck stop routes to transport victims. Children, mostly, taken from various states, moved through a network of drivers, sold to the highest bidders. He gave addresses, names, routes, everything. The children stood beside Jackson the entire time, silent and still, their black eyes fixed on the driver. Just before the police arrived, they turned to Jackson. "You have done well," they said. "You did not look away. You did not ignore. You will remember us." Then they walked toward the woods and vanished into the darkness. There one moment and gone the next. The police arrived, then state police, then FBI. The driver survived his injuries and was arrested. His confession led to raids across 6 states, 17 arrests in the first week. A trafficking network that had been operating for over 4 years was completely dismantled. 7 children were rescued alive from a location in Kentucky that the driver identified. 2 bodies were recovered from another location in Virginia. Jackson gave his statement, told them everything, including the part about the children who appeared from nowhere and whom bullets could not touch. The detectives looked at each other with expressions Jackson could not read. One of them pulled him aside. "This is going to sound crazy," the detective said quietly, "but you are the 5th person to report something like this. 5 separate incidents along this trafficking route over the past 3 years. 5 different people reported seeing children with black eyes appearing before drivers confessed or were caught." The detective showed Jackson a file, missing children reports. 2 children, a boy and a girl, had disappeared from a rest stop on the same highway in 2019. Ages 8 and 9, brother and sister. Their bodies had never been found. The last confirmed sighting was on security footage from a truck stop 20 miles from where Jackson worked, getting into a semi with a driver, who was later identified but never caught. "We think they were the first victims," the detective said, "the ones who started this particular network. And something about how they died, or where, or what was done to them. It created something. We do not talk about it officially because we sound insane, but 5 times now, these children have appeared and led us to traffickers." The security footage from Jackson's gas station was reviewed. It showed Jackson talking to empty air, showed him getting water and cookies that he set on the counter for no one, showed the driver entering, seeing nothing, pulling a gun and firing at nothing. The children were never visible on the cameras. But Jackson's testimony and the driver's confession matched perfectly, and the results were 17 arrests and 7 children saved. Jackson quit that job immediately. He transferred to a different college, moved to a different state, somewhere far from Appalachian Mountains and remote highways. He received an anonymous letter 6 months later. It came with no return address, just a single sheet of paper and 2 photographs. The photographs showed the missing children from 2019, the brother and sister, school photos, smiling faces, alive and full of promise. On the paper was a simple message: "Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for not looking away. We can rest now." Jackson does not know if the letter was from the children's family or from someone else who knew the story. He does not know if the Black-Eyed Children were actually the spirits of those murdered siblings or something else that took their form. He knows only that he saw something that should not exist, that it exposed evil that was very real and very human, and that somehow the supernatural and the criminal had collided in a way that saved lives. He works as an advocate now for organizations that fight human trafficking. He volunteers with groups that search for missing children. He speaks at awareness events, though he never mentions the supernatural aspect of his experience. He just talks about staying alert, not ignoring signs, being willing to get involved when something seems wrong. But at night, when he closes his eyes, he still sees those 2 children standing in the fluorescent light of a gas station, holding water bottles they would never drink, waiting with patience beyond human understanding for the moment when justice could be served. And he wonders how many other black-eyed children are out there, walking along dark roads and through empty parking lots, bearing witness to crimes committed against them, refusing to rest until someone finally sees them and refuses to look away. So I have a story for you today about a place where broken children were sent to heal, but where 2 children who were never broken, never living, appeared to bear witness to decades of suffering. This comes from a man named DeAndre, and what happened during his time as a counselor at a state-run youth facility exposed systemic abuse and proved that sometimes the dead care more for the living than those who are supposed to protect them. No worries if you think you understand how institutions work and who watches over vulnerable children, because what DeAndre experienced will show you that oversight comes from unexpected places, and judgment arrives when you least expect it. It was September of 2020, and DeAndre was starting his 2nd year as a youth counselor at Mountain View Youth Services in western North Carolina. It was a state-run residential facility for 30 children in foster care, kids ranging from 8 to 17 who had been removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. DeAndre had gone into this work because he believed he could make a difference, could provide stability and care to children who had known neither. The reality was harder than he had expected, but he was committed to the work. Tuesday morning, he arrived at 7 a.m. for his shift and found 2 children sitting in the common room watching television. A boy and a girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, wearing donated clothes from the facility's storage closet. DeAndre checked his roster. No new intakes were scheduled. He walked into the room. "Good morning. I do not think we have met. When did you arrive?" The children did not look away from the television. They did not answer. DeAndre frowned and went to the main office. "Who are the 2 kids in the common room?" he asked the night shift supervisor. She looked confused. "What 2 kids?" "We have 28 residents, all accounted for in their rooms or at breakfast." DeAndre walked her back to the common room. The children were still there, still watching TV. "Those two," Dandre said, pointing. The supervisor stared at the couch. "Dandre, there is nobody there. Are you feeling okay?" Dandre looked at the children. They slowly turned their heads to look back at him. Their eyes were completely black, solid black, with no whites visible. He took a step backward. "You can see them?" the supervisor asked. "No, I thought I did. Maybe I'm just tired." He left the room quickly, pulse racing. When he looked back, the children were staring at him through the doorway, expressionless and unblinking. Throughout the day, Dandre saw the children everywhere. In the hallways, in the cafeteria, in the recreation yard. Always together, always still, always watching. Other staff members walked right past them without acknowledgement. But the residents saw them. Dandre caught kids staring at empty spaces with frightened expressions. He overheard whispers. "They are back. Do not look at them. They only come when something bad is going to happen." Dandre pulled aside one of the older residents, a 15-year-old named Marcus, who had been at the facility for 2 years. "Marcus, do you see 2 children who should not be here?" Marcus's face went pale. "You see them too?" "Most staff cannot. They show up every few years. Last time was 2017, right before the state investigation." Dandre felt his stomach drop. "Investigation of what?" Marcus looked around nervously. "Bad stuff. Stuff staff did to us. They got caught because of what those kids made happen." That night, Dandre stayed late to search facility records. He found incident reports going back 30 years. Every 3 to 5 years, there were clusters of unusual events, staff experiencing hallucinations, residents exhibiting behavioral problems, equipment malfunctions, and then, inevitably, investigations, allegations of abuse or neglect that led to firings, prosecutions, policy changes. The pattern was clear and disturbing. The children began appearing in multiple locations simultaneously. Dandre would see them in the common room, and a resident would report seeing them in the dormitory at the same moment. They were no longer just watching. They were moving through the facility, and wherever they went, chaos followed. Residents began having violent outbursts, destroying property, attacking staff. 3 separate incidents in one day, all involving kids who had been calm for months. Dandre stayed after his shift ended, unable to leave, feeling that something significant was building toward a breaking point. At 11 p.m., the facility was supposed to be quiet, all residents in their rooms, night staff doing rounds. Instead, Dandre heard shouting from the dormitory wing. He ran toward the sound and found 5 residents in the hallway, all of them screaming about the children, about seeing things, about memories they could not escape. The 2 children stood at the end of the hallway, and for the first time they moved with purpose. They walked from door to door, touching each one. Behind every door they touched, Dandre heard crying, not from the residents inside, but from somewhere else, some other time. He heard voices begging to be let out, heard impacts like fists on wood, heard children screaming that they were sorry, that they would be good, please just let them out. Dandre followed the children as they moved through the building. They led him to the administrative wing, to a locked records room that required supervisor clearance to enter. The door swung open, even though Dandre had not touched it. The children walked inside. Dandre followed, his rational mind screaming at him to stop, to leave, to call for help. But something deeper drove him forward. The children stood beside a filing cabinet pointing at it. Dandre opened the drawers. They were full of incident reports that had never been filed with the state. Decades of reports, documenting abuse, staff hitting residents, denying food as punishment, locking children in isolation rooms for days, ignoring medical emergencies, covering up injuries. 15 deaths over 30 years, all officially ruled as accidents or natural causes, but the reports showed patterns of neglect and abuse preceding each death. 2 files sat on top, separate from the others. D'Andre opened them. A boy and a girl, brother and sister, ages 9 and 11, admitted to the facility in 1998. Both died 3 months later in a fire in the old west wing of the building. The fire had been ruled accidental, caused by faulty wiring, but handwritten notes in the margin of the report suggested the children had been locked in their room as punishment and could not escape when the fire started. D'Andre looked up at the children standing beside him. They smiled, the first expression he had seen from them. Then they placed their hands on his. The moment their cold fingers touched his skin, he saw everything. He experienced every abuse suffered by every child who died in this facility over 30 years. He felt their fear, their pain, their desperate hope that someone would help them. He saw staff members turning away, choosing careers over conscience. He saw administrators destroying evidence, falsifying records, protecting the institution instead of the children. The visions overwhelmed him. D'Andre collapsed to the floor, the children's hands still gripping his. He could not breathe, could not think, could only experience an endless cascade of suffering. When it finally stopped, he was lying on the floor of the records room, covered in sweat, gasping. The children were gone. The files were scattered around him, and his phone was in his hand, having dialed 911 without his conscious intention. Police came. State investigators came. D'Andre told them everything, showed them the files, gave them access to the records room. The investigation that followed was massive and brutal. 30 years of documentation proving systemic abuse and cover-ups. 6 staff members were fired and faced criminal charges. 3 administrators resigned. The facility was temporarily shut down while children were relocated to safer placements. D'Andre suffered a complete psychological breakdown. He was hospitalized for 2 weeks, diagnosed with acute stress disorder. He could not return to social work. The weight of what he had experienced, what he had felt through the children's touch, was too much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of children who had died alone and afraid in a place that was supposed to protect them. But he found a new purpose. He became a whistleblower, testifying at hearings, speaking to media, pushing for reform of the entire foster care system. He worked with legislators to pass laws requiring independent oversight of residential facilities. He helped create an organization that investigates allegations of institutional abuse. The facility reopened 6 months later with completely new staff and administration. A memorial was installed for the 15 children who had died in state care at that location. The 2 siblings from 1998 were given proper recognition, their deaths finally acknowledged as the tragedy they were, rather than the accident the institution had claimed. Their names were spoken aloud, their short lives remembered. No sightings of the Black-Eyed Children have been reported since the memorial dedication. The facility operates now with transparency and accountability that was absent for decades. Former residents have come forward to share their experiences, and many have received counseling and support that was never offered when they needed it most. D'Andre still suffers from PTSD. He still has nightmares about the children's cold hands, about the cascade of suffering they showed him. But he believes their appearance was not malevolent. They were not there to harm, but to reveal, to force people who had looked away for decades to finally see what had been done in the shadows of a place meant to shelter children. He believes the children were not demons or ghosts in the traditional sense, but something else entirely. Witnesses, watchers. Whatever they were, they carried the weight of every child who had suffered in that building, and they refused to let that suffering be forgotten or dismissed. They appeared when the living failed to protect the vulnerable, and they stayed until justice was served. And perhaps that is what is most terrifying. Not that the dead can return, but that they have to. That the living can fail so completely that supernatural intervention becomes necessary to protect children from the very systems designed to keep them safe. D'Andre knows now that some institutions fail not through accident, but through deliberate, systematic cruelty. And sometimes, the only ones who care enough to stop it are those who died because of it, who return wearing forms that terrify us precisely because they force us to see what we would rather ignore. If the black-eyed children appeared to bear witness, then their black eyes reflect back our own blindness, our own willingness to look away from suffering, because acknowledging it would require us to act. And maybe that is why they are so terrifying, not because of what they are, but because of what they reveal about what we have become. So, I have one final story for you tonight about faith, being tested in the most personal and terrifying way possible. This comes from a man named Jackson, and what happened during a church youth retreat deep in the Virginia mountains taught an entire group about the danger of hidden sins and the power of radical honesty. No worries if you think you can keep your secrets safe behind a mask of faith and fellowship, because what Jackson and his group experienced proved that sometimes the most terrifying mirrors are the ones that reflect what we hide from ourselves and from God. It was June of 2023, and Jackson was the youth pastor at Grace Community Church, a mid-sized evangelical congregation in Richmond, Virginia. He had organized a weekend retreat for 20 teenagers, ages 14 to 17, at a rented camp facility in the mountains. The location was perfect, isolated, peaceful, surrounded by nature, with cabins and a fire pit and all the amenities needed for a meaningful spiritual experience. The goal was to strengthen the teens' faith, build community, and give them space away from the distractions of phones and social media to really connect with God and each other. They arrived Friday afternoon, unpacked, ate dinner, and gathered around the campfire as the sun set behind the mountains. The plan was simple: share testimonies, sing worship songs, pray together, create that sense of spiritual intimacy that was so hard to achieve during regular church services. The fire crackled, the stars came out, and Jackson felt that familiar sense of satisfaction that came from doing work that mattered. Halfway through the testimony time, 2 children emerged from the woods. A boy and a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, wearing clothes that looked old-fashioned and formal. Dark colors, buttoned shirts, clothes you might see in historical photos from the 1950s. They stood at the edge of the firelight, just outside the circle of teens. "Hi there," Jackson called to them, smiling. "Are you from another campsite? Would you like to join us?" The children did not answer, but they walked forward and sat down in the circle between 2 of the teens. The students shifted uncomfortably, making space. Jackson noticed several of the girls looking at the children with confused, slightly frightened expressions. "What are your names?" Jackson asked. The children just stared at him, with eyes that looked too dark in the firelight. "Okay, well, welcome. We're just sharing about our faith journeys." The testimony time continued, but the energy had changed. Students who had been eager to share were now quiet. Everyone kept glancing at the 2 children, who sat perfectly still, never blinking, never moving. After 20 minutes of awkward silence, Jackson called for worship songs. As the teens began to sing, the children remained silent. They did not sing, did not bow their heads during prayer, just sat and stared at the faces around the circle. When the campfire time ended, Jackson announced it was time to head to the cabins for the night. The children stood with everyone else and followed the group toward the 3 cabins where the students were staying. "Now hold on," Jackson said, stepping in front of them. "Where are your parents? Which campsite are you from?" The children spoke for the first time, in perfect unison, their voices overlapping like a harmony. "We cannot go where we are not invited. Please invite us in." Everything in Jackson's training, his instincts, his years of ministry, screamed at him that this was wrong. Something about the phrasing, about the request for invitation, felt like a trap. "No," he said firmly. "You need to go back to your own campsite. I will walk you there if you need help finding it." The children's expressions changed. Something cold and knowing entered their faces. Their eyes, even in the darkness, appeared completely black. "You were told to invite us," they said. "Why do you refuse?" Then the screaming started, from inside the cabins, even though all the teens were standing outside. Jackson and the other adult chaperones ran toward the buildings. The teens followed. When they threw open the doors, they found the children inside, both cabins simultaneously. The same two children, now somehow in three places at once, standing outside where Jackson had just been talking to them, inside cabin 1 and inside cabin 2. Mass panic erupted. Teens were crying, trying to push past the adults to get outside. The children in the cabins began to move among them, walking from teen to teen, whispering in each one's ear. And as they whispered, the teens began to react. Some burst into tears. Others fell to their knees. Others started shouting denials at accusations no one else could hear. Jackson grabbed one of the children by the arm, trying to pull them away from a sobbing girl. The moment he touched the child, he froze. Images flooded his mind. His own secrets, his own sins played out like a movie. The pornography he watched late at night, sites he cleared from his browser history, the money he had skimmed from the youth budget for personal expenses, justifying it as borrowed funds he would pay back, the inappropriate thoughts he had about some of the older teen girls. Thoughts he told himself did not count because he never acted on them. His entire secret life exposed in an instant. The children turned to face him. "You lead these young people," they said in unison. "You teach them about purity and honesty, but you are filled with lies." Jackson felt his knees buckle. Around him, chaos had erupted. The children were moving through the group, and everywhere they went, they spoke truths. They revealed the secret eating disorder one girl had hidden for 2 years. They exposed the boy who was stealing from his parents to buy drugs. They called out the affair between two teens who had been hiding their sexual relationship from everyone. They revealed cutting, lying, bullying, abuse happening at home that no one had reported. The children knew everything, every hidden thing, every private sin, every secret shame, and they spoke it all aloud in front of everyone. The carefully constructed facades that the teens and adults wore to church every Sunday were being ripped away, leaving only raw, exposed humanity. "Stop!" Jackson shouted, finding his voice. "Stop this!" The children turned to him with expressions that were not quite smiling but held satisfaction. "You want us to stop speaking truth?" they asked. "Then speak it yourselves. Confession is the key that locks us out. Silence is the door that lets us in. Choose." Jackson felt something break inside him, the same thing that had broken in the church in Caledon's story, the same surrender to truth that he had preached about but never truly practiced. "I have a pornography addiction," he said, his voice cracking. "I have stolen from the youth budget. I have had impure thoughts about students I am supposed to protect." The words poured out, and with each admission, he felt the children's grip on his mind loosening. Around him, other adults began confessing. The other youth leader admitted to her own hidden addictions. The parent chaperones confessed to problems in their marriages, to sins they had hidden behind church service. And the teens, seeing the adults model this radical honesty, began to open up about their own struggles. Not under the children's compulsion now, but voluntarily. The youth group became a place of genuine confession, of people seeing each other's brokenness and choosing to stay anyway. As the confessions flowed, the children began to change. Their forms flickered, becoming translucent. Jackson could see through them to the cabin walls behind them. For just a moment, he saw something else. 2 children dressed for church, holding hands, standing in a clearing in the woods. He saw them clearly, saw their fear, saw them running from something. Then the image faded. "Truth has been spoken," the children said, their voices growing faint. "Masks have been removed. The light has been chosen over darkness." They looked at each other, then back at the group. "We have waited so long to hear truth spoken in this place. Now we can rest." They walked toward the cabin door and simply faded away, becoming less solid with each step until they were gone completely. The group, sat in stunned silence for a long time. Some were crying, others were in shock. Slowly, they began to talk, not about leaving or pretending this had not happened, but about what it meant, about the relief of finally having secrets known, about the exhausting work of maintaining perfect Christian appearances, about the difference between faith as performance and faith as honest relationship with God. Jackson called the parents the next morning and told them what had happened. Not the supernatural parts, but the confessions, the revelations, the need for follow-up care. The retreat was cut short. Teens went home to have hard conversations with their families. Jackson met with the church elders and confessed everything, offering his resignation. To his surprise, they did not accept it immediately. Instead, they asked him to enter counseling, to address his addictions and deceptions, and to consider whether he could lead more honestly going forward. In the weeks that followed, Jackson did research. He contacted the camp's previous owners and found records going back to 1967. 2 children, siblings, had disappeared from a church youth camp at that location, ages 10 and 12. They had reported abuse by a church leader to other adults at the camp. They were not believed. They ran into the woods and were never seen again. Search parties found no trace. The case went cold. The camp closed, changed hands several times, but rumors persisted of children appearing during religious gatherings, forcing confrontations with hidden sins. The pattern was clear. The children appeared when faith communities gathered, when hypocrisy was thick, when people were using religion as a cover for darkness rather than a path toward light. They did not harm directly, but they exposed. They held up mirrors that could not be avoided, and they stayed until truth was spoken, until the sickness of maintained lies was lanced and drained. Jackson went through months of counseling. He addressed his pornography addiction with clinical help. He made restitution for the stolen money. He learned to lead with vulnerability rather than the false perfection he had projected for years. Several teens from that retreat also entered therapy to address issues that had been revealed. The youth group became known as a place where honesty was valued over appearance, where confession was normal rather than shocking. The camp facility was purchased by a Christian organization that installed a memorial for the 2 missing children. Their names were finally spoken aloud, their disappearance acknowledged as the tragedy it was, rather than an uncomfortable story to be forgotten. No further sightings of the Black-Eyed Children have been reported since the memorial dedication. Jackson still serves as youth pastor, though he leads differently now. He starts every retreat, every Bible study, every gathering with his own confession of ongoing struggles. He models the idea that faith is not about being perfect, but about being honest about imperfection. He teaches that God does not need our pretense, but our authenticity. And sometimes, late at night, he thinks about those children emerging from the woods with their black eyes and their impossible knowledge. He wonders if they were demons sent to destroy or angels sent to refine. He has decided they were neither and both. They were instruments of truth in a world drowning in comfortable lies. They were mirrors that forced people to see themselves as they actually were, rather than as they pretended to be. The most terrifying thing Jackson realizes now was not the supernatural appearance of the children. It was the revelation that he had become exactly what he preached against. A hypocrite, a whitewashed tomb, someone who looked righteous on the outside but was rotting on the inside. The children did not create his sins. They simply refused to let him hide them anymore. And maybe that is the true horror at the heart of the Black-Eyed Children phenomenon. They do not bring evil. They expose it. They show us what we have become when we thought no one was watching. They prove that some truths refuse to stay buried, that some injustices will not be forgotten, and that sometimes the dead care more about honesty than the living ever did. The most terrifying monster is not the one with black eyes standing at your door. It is the one wearing your face in the mirror, the one you refuse to acknowledge until something forces you to look directly at what you have become.